Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry we're a little behind. We got held up in caucus a little bit there. We're going to be short a couple members of council. I think some will be coming and going as we get through this time of the season, I suppose. But we'll get underway right away. I understand, Karina, you're kicking us off. Oh, 1 second here. Your microphones aren't on, I don't think. Thanks, Jacqueline. They should glow, maybe. Try? Okay.
All right, so welcome again to the first audit committee of this new term of council. For those of you that are new to council, my name is Karina Tasker and I'm the internal auditor for the city. Before we jump into the content for today's meeting, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what audit committee is all about. Or maybe not. So in general, the purpose of this committee, which meets quarterly, is to provide an oversight of city's internal controls, financial reporting, compliance, and risk management. So you as a committee are responsible to review and approve the audited financial statements, which are prepared by our accounting staff and audited by an external firm. You are also responsible to approve both the external audit plan as well as my internal audit work plan, both of which you'll see later today. And finally, you approve the selection of the external auditor and fee structure, which goes out for tender every 5 years, and we're currently in the 5th year of the current contract with KPMG. So more detail about the audit committee and internal audit can be found on starting on page 20 of your council orientation package. This slide shows the typical annual schedule of reports that come forward through audit committee. Usually every quarter I will have an audit status report, which provides the results of any audits that I've completed during the quarter. They are for information only and don't require any approval or direction. Staff and management are expected to implement the recommendations in the reports or provide another way to address the findings if they disagree with the recommendations. With this year being the exception because of the election, usually in September I will bring a draft internal audit plan for discussion and input by the committee. I will then return with the completed plan for approval in December. Accounting will present the financial statements from the previous year in June, and the external auditor will present their findings from their audit of those statements. You are responsible for approving the statements at that time in June. The external auditor then returns in December to obtain your approval of their audit plan for the next year. Are there any questions before we jump into today's meeting?
I am not seeing any. Please continue.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Sherry now.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sherry Brisbane. I'm the supervisor of financial reporting in the accounting division. So my spiel is usually consistent with what Karina just covered. As she mentioned, this is the 5th year of the 5-year approval of their audit plan, they went to tender, and this is the last of the 5 years in that tender, so we'll be going forth with an RFP in the coming year for the next 5-year term. Today is the first of 2 meetings between yourselves and KPMG. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Beddick, who is the partner on our audit.
Thank you, Sherry. As introduced, my name is Matt Beddick with KPMG. I'm the lead audit partner for the audited financial statements of the city. Nice to see some familiar faces, and welcome to the new faces as well. With me up there is Courtney Cheel. She's the senior manager who also participates on the audit. I will go through the presentation over the next few minutes. I'm happy to take questions throughout the presentation, but I'll also be available for questions or comments that follow thereon. I'm going to move quickly through the executive summary because we will touch on all of these throughout the presentation. But I will bring your attention to page 5, which outlines the group audit scope. So the financial statements that will be presented in June are the consolidated financial statements of the city. And they include all of the boards and enterprises that are under the reporting entity for the city. And so that's the general activities that you deal with here at council, but also includes the Gasworks enterprise, the Kitchener Public Library, the Center in the Square, both the Kitchener downtown and the Belmont improvement areas. The financial statements also include the city's investment in Kitchener Power Corp, but not on a consolidated basis, just on a net income pickup basis. For every financial statement audit, we are required to discuss the risk of fraud in the audit. And for those of you that are new to this discussion, the risk of fraud, from our perspective, is the intentional misstatement of financial information. We are not really discussing ways at which the city could be the victim of external fraud or theft. And the risk of fraud comes in two parts as required by audit standards. First, we're required to assess the risk of fraud from revenue recognition. And what we mean by that is are there ways in which management will intentionally use revenue policies in order to misstate the financial statements? We have the option to rebut or sort of do away with this presumption, and we have done so in the audit, and that's partially because this risk is typically associated with for-profit enterprises that typically use revenue as a major measurement source within their financial statements. Further, we understand the types of revenue transactions within the city are not susceptible necessarily to the typical fraudulently related activities. The next risk of fraud that we're required to address within the audit is the risk of override of controls. And what we mean by this is regardless of how good any entity's internal control structure is, there does remain the opportunity to override those controls for the purpose of fraud. We're not allowed to dispose of this risk, and we must have a response to it. We've listed our proposed procedures in connection with that response that are listed there. The most significant of the three being the evaluation of high-risk adjustments. And so what we do there is we identify through the general ledger what we consider to be high-risk entries, ones that don't make sense in terms of their timing, who prepares the entry, the types of accounts or transactions that those are referred to. When we look at those entries, we make sure they're appropriately prepared, approved, and authorized, and make sure there's nothing that causes us any concern. In our overall assessment of fraud risk with the City of Kitchener, we've assessed it as low, which is the lowest possible risk assessment we can provide. In terms of other areas of the financial statements, I'll go over some of those, what those are, and what our approach to those sections are. So the first deals with post-employment benefits, and these are the benefits that are provided to employees after they are employed by the city. And so these may include WSIB, they may include sick leave, and they may also include health and dental benefits. For these types of transactions, we rely on the city's use of a third-party actuary to calculate those balances, but we do look at the underlying data that the third-party actuary uses, as well as look at the assumptions that are used in their calculation. The second area of risk that we identified is the accounting for obligatory reserve fund revenue and deferred revenue, and most notably this is accounting for development charges. The key here is that development charges, while they may be collected now, are only permitted to be recognized as revenue once the related development expenditures have been incurred. And so there's often a mismatch between when the monies are received and when the monies are spent. And so we need to make sure that the controls surrounding this transaction flow are appropriate and they're operating effectively. And then we need to make sure that when that revenue is recognized, it's appropriately tied to the related expenditures. The next area we'll deal with is the accounting for tangible capital assets. So this is all the fixed assets that the city has in providing services to the city. This includes buildings, parks, roads, bridges, all the underground infrastructure, and all those types of things that make the city work. One of the reasons that we spend a significant chunk of our time here is it is the largest single balance on the city's financial statements at over $1 billion for the last financial statement year. As well, we're concerned about what we refer to as the boundary between what is treated as a capital item and what is treated as an expense item. So we want to make sure items that are appropriately capital are treated that way, and items that are appropriately expensed are also treated that way. Next area of focus is the gasworks operation. Obviously, that's a significant operation for the city and one that we prepare a special audit of the activities for the year. There is a high volume of transactions during the year, and certainly the outcome of those transactions and the audit thereon could impact future gas supply and delivery rates. Other areas of focus that we've identified here are investments and related income. So we do confirm the value and the content of the investments that the city carries. Taxation revenue, which is obviously a significant source of revenue for the city. We compare that amount to records from MPAC and the bylaws passed for taxation. User charges and service, or user fees and service charge revenue. So obviously there are a significant number of accounts and different types of user charges and fees. This will include rentals, this will include water and gas revenues, this will include the whole host of different fees that the city charges. We do look at the controls around cash collection and application for the recording of this revenue. As well, we perform what we refer to as high assurance analytical activities. A good example of that would be in the water revenue and the water sewer revenue. We know for the most part water that's purchased from the region and then distributed to your residents should be one and about the same, with the exception of what may be lost due to leakage and other breakage. And so we use that information so we know how much water you purchased. That's approximately equal to the water you sold. We know the rates that were established by council. We do the math and we confirm the amounts that are recorded. And the last thing I'll touch on here is the auditing of expenses. And so we do look at that on a disaggregated basis. Obviously, payroll expenses, a significant portion of the city's expenses. We test the controls around payroll and how employees are paid, and the rates that they're paid. We also look at specific transactions for expenses that are incurred for non-payroll expenditures. We perform trend analysis to see how those expenses are trending over time. As well, we perform procedures in the new year. So in this case, in 2019, we look at things that have happened in 2019 to make sure that they are recorded in the proper period, so that we're not looking at, let's say, payments made in 2019 that should be recorded in 18. We want to make sure we capture all of 18 types of expenses. On the next page, we go through the concept of materiality in the conduct of the audit. So as auditors, we're required to set financial statement materiality at the commencement of the audit. It is the threshold by which we'll evaluate any differences or errors that we find, as well as it sets the scoping for the work that we do. We've set materiality at approximately $6 million, which is about 1.65% of the prior year income. Audit standards permit us to set materiality between 0.5% and 3%, and so we're slightly below the midway point within that range. That point in the range is also consistent with many of our other municipal audits in the province of Ontario. Now, oftentimes the first question comes up is, you've set materiality at $6 million. That seems like a pretty high number. Shouldn't we be managing to a much tighter level than that? And we agree. That's not how we're managing the city, but just how we conduct the audit. And when we compare the $6 million to the $300 million or more of the city's revenues, we would say, if revenues were higher or lower by $6 million, would somebody looking at those financial statements come to a different conclusion as to the size and scope of the city's activities? And we believe that's not the case. We do, however, want to bring to your attention that we're required to accumulate and identify and report any differences or errors that we identify at the $300,000 level. So we take the $6 million materiality and we apply a factor of 5% to that. So we are getting much more granular in the work that we perform. I think I'll sort of wrap the formal presentation up there. Actually, I've got one more slide I want to just address, two more. As was mentioned, we are in the final year of a 5-year term of our contract. We provide on this slide the schedule of fees for the current year and the amounts that were charged for the prior year. Both of those figures are in line with our proposal from 4 years ago. So with that, to the chair, I'll take any questions or comments.
Thank you for the presentation. Questions, Councillor Gazzola?
I'd like you to go back, if you could, just to that schedule where you show the 300,000 and the 6 million. Just if you could go into it a little deeper. So if you come across an error in the $300,000 range, you go over it with staff, and are they required to change it, or is it just something that you note?
So if we, for example, if we were to find a $400,000 error, just so we're clear as to the number, we will review that with staff. We will recommend that they make that change and correct the financial statements. However, at that point, we wouldn't consider that a material difference by itself. And so if staff decided not to make that correction and that was the only uncorrected error, we could still issue a clean audit opinion. But we will be reporting that difference.
You will report that
Yes.
there was a difference
Yes.
that wasn't corrected?
Correct.
So it's clearly reported. Okay, that's fine. That's good. The other question, we talked about all the things, or you talked about all the things you're looking at, and the one is the post-employment benefits. We had a bit of a precarious situation, a few years ago. We were getting behind or something. Where does that stand? Is that something I should be talking to staff about as opposed to our auditors?
If I can rephrase the question, I think that was the level of reserves with respect to the WSIB amount. I would direct that to staff. I can comment on what our responsibility is relative to the recorded amounts.
That's what I want. I want you. Are you, as our auditor, satisfied with where we're at?
So that there's that where you're at is sort of outside of the scope of the audit. What we need to make sure is the amount, the liability that's recorded in the financial statements is accurate. So we're satisfied that what's been recorded is the correct figure. We can't really comment on how it's to be funded or paid for in the future.
Okay. So
did that help?
Yeah, that answers my question. You report on the liability that we're reporting.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's fine. My last question is on your fees.
Yes.
They're very reasonably, very minor increase. Now, the number of hours you spend on the job, do they change in order to keep that fee where they are, or are you spending as much time on the job as you did in the previous years, or do you have to cut back in order to meet your fee?
Well, we don't cut hours to meet the fee. Our team puts in the amount of hours required to properly perform the work. In any one given year, the number of hours can fluctuate, perhaps maybe by 10%, depending on the level of issues encountered in any one given year, or perhaps dealing with staffing changes within our team. But no, we're not required to cut hours to maintain that fee structure.
Okay, that's good. Good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, there are no other questions. Just to have one myself. Just for clarity, could you remind us how the materiality figure relates to the corporation as a whole versus some of these smaller boards like the Belmont Improvement Area?
Sure. So that materiality figure is for the consolidated operations of the city. When we do our audits of the smaller organizations like the improvement areas or the library or the Sandon Square, we use a much lower materiality figure for those organizations based on the revenue levels that they have. And again, it's usually in the 2 to 3%. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Very good. Thank you. There are actually no other questions, so I need a mover for this item. Moved by Councillor Johnson. Any comments? I don't see any except for good work on this, and this is again the last of 5 years, so I guess we'll probably be seeing you applying then for the ongoing work in this field. It's been, actually, KPMG's been the auditor as long as I've been here, I think. How long?
I believe this is our 14th year.
14th year, wow.
Or give or take. It might be 15th, because I think 1 year it was extended due to some extenuating circumstances, but I can't remember. It's either 14 or 15.
Okay, and have you ever not issued a clean audit?
No, they've always been clean audit opinions.
I'd like to throw that in there. Councillor Hernandez has a question as well.
Yeah, and I do appreciate the work that Matthew and your team do all the time. When you had looked at the list of, I guess, the group of committees and all that stuff that you, and organizations that you do under our umbrella, does not KHI, Kitchener Housing Inc., fall upon that as well?
So we do perform audits of Kitchener Housing Inc. and Kitchener Nonprofit Property Management. Those entities are not consolidated within the City of Kitchener, so they're not part of the group audit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're back to Karina with the internal audit work plan.
All right. Let's give it a second here. All right, so first up is the 2019 Internal Audit Work Plan, which I'm seeking your approval for. But first, just a few words about internal audit in general. As I mentioned, I am an audit shop of one person, and the goal of my work is really to protect the city's assets and interests through various types of works. So I aim to make sure that our operations are as effective and efficient as possible and providing good value for our tax dollars. That our controls are strong enough to protect our various assets from loss, such as theft, fraud, or error, or damage, and that we maintain compliance with established policies, procedures, and legislation. So the Institute of Internal Auditors, which is the governing body for internal audit practitioners, divides audit work into two types of services. The first type is assurance services, which are any reviews that require an objective third-party assessment of evidence. These types of reviews are independently chosen by myself based on emerging risks, best practice, what other municipalities are doing, and based on your input. As I mentioned earlier, due to the election this year, your input wasn't gathered this year, but normally in September each year, you would have the opportunity to suggest areas for review. The resulting plan is then approved by this committee each December. The types of reviews that are typically included in this include controls audits, which include an analysis and test of control points within a process to ensure that fraudulent activity can be eliminated or mitigated. Compliance testing to determine if staff is following the rules, regulations, and policies associated with the service, and investigating staff or public complaints about alleged staff wrongdoing, including things like fraud, theft, or inappropriate behavior. They can also include comprehensive reviews of a division or service if an independent opinion and recommendations is required. These can also fall into the consulting services category, however, if the review is more advisory in nature. So overall, the assurance services take up about 25% of my time. The second type is consulting services, which includes advisory and facilitation services, which focus on the improvement of the design and delivery of services. These reviews are typically requested through a number of avenues, including through management or council, customer service surveys, and other staff or public input on areas or services that could use improvement. These services typically take up about 75% of my time and also involve other staff from across the corporation. In the past, these types of reviews were included in the internal audit work plan. However, with the move towards lean management methodologies for service improvement, a much more collaborative approach is being taken, which sees myself and other service improvement staff taking a more facilitative approach. Where in the past we provided recommendations and observations that staff were required to implement, now we are involving staff in the improvement process and therefore want to separate this work from the assurance services and the stigma of internal audit as being punitive. Therefore, these types of services will no longer be part of the internal audit plan and don't require your approval. They will not be presented through Audit Committee, but they will be presented as part of a summary of improvement initiatives through other means. So the 2019 Internal Audit Plan includes just the assurance services that I am proposing. First is the continued testing of hiring transparency and nepotism, and you'll hear more about this today through my status report. But the reason that it's on the work plan for next year is that senior management was not satisfied with the results of this year's audit and would like continued focus on this topic. The next audit is the controls audit of overtime and on-call pay. And I've never done an audit in this topic before, but it has been done by other peer municipalities such as Guelph. The audit will review control points in the employee attendance management processes to ensure the use of overtime is warranted and approved. The audit will also look at on-call pay structure and assess the need for on-call pay across various roles. The next three reviews, so the arenas, the cash deposits, and the Kitchener Market, are all status updates, which simply means that I've conducted a full audit sometime in the past, and this is a check-in to assess the recommendations and determine whether the further review is required. These are usually fairly quick and easy to do. And then the last is the physical inventory count verification, which is a recurring annual activity, and you'll hear more about that in my status report today. And the final item is any confidential investigations that are requested by staff or the public. And these are usually few and far between, and I usually don't receive more than one, if any at all, throughout the year. Just for your information, the consulting work that will take up the bulk of my time next year will be continued on two large work items. The first is the organizational structure review of the 4 utilities, namely gas, water, sanitary, and stormwater. And the second is the development services review, for which I'll be assisting in the process improvement phase of this review. So now I'll open the floor to any questions about the work plan and then ask for a motion to approve the plan.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, going back to the hiring transparency, you said that senior staff weren't satisfied with your audit and...
No, with the results of the audit.
With the results, yeah, okay. So what does that mean?
You'll hear about it in a few minutes in the status report, but there needs to be continued focus on ensuring that our processes are fair and transparent. So we'll need to keep checking in to make sure that we're making forward progress on that.
Okay, so it's they didn't get the results that they wanted or expected, or...
Correct.
Yeah, okay. When we talk market, we're talking the Kitchener Market operation.
Correct.
Right? We're not talking yeah. You spend a lot of time on physical inventory checks. The reason I asked, I mean, it's not a big issue here. It's like inventories are really minimal or in relation to everything. I'm just curious as to the amount of time you would spend on that, or if it would be better spent in other areas.
I spend about 2 hours per year on it, so it's not a significant amount of my time.
Okay, well, it's listed here as one of the 5 or 6 things, so okay, that's fine.
It occurs once a year on a weekend, and it doesn't take up very much time at all.
Yeah. Okay, and the final, can you just expand a little bit on development services review? I know we're going through that, but just explain a little better what it is.
So this is a large comprehensive review of our development services. It is being led by a project manager within the development services department. My role in this will be helping with one piece of the review, which will be looking at several of the development processes and doing some reviews, some lean process reviews on those.
Yeah. When I remember we had a discussion that they've talked to all of staff, and I questioned at the time that the review of the area is being done by someone who's in the area. Is that as valuable? It becomes very difficult for someone that's directly involved doing the review as opposed to an outside body.
So the project manager is the manager of service coordination and improvement, and that is their role within the department, is to run projects within the department. The review will actually involve myself as well as a number of other service improvement staff from across the corporation, so it won't be biased or from the point of view of development services.
Okay, so when it comes to making decisions, so then you get involved with that. Do other outside parties get involved with that? As to decisions as to the result of the review?
Mr. Reedman, do you want to comment?
Through the chair, so I'm the overall champion for the project. Mr. Chapman, as CAO, is also heavily involved, and then council will make decisions on key aspects of the project at key intervals.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Marsh?
Yeah, I'm just curious about how do you anticipate you'll be reporting back, in what way on the consulting services, and do you really, I guess the other question is why do you feel it's necessary to separate those?
As I mentioned, we're moving away from it being an audit as opposed to a facilitated service. So we're helping them through the recommendations, and the service improvements are coming from staff themselves. So we do want to report those back to council as to show you what has been improved in terms of certain services, but that'll come through probably one of the other committees. It's not an audit matter per se.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but it'll still be you, Karina, leading the both.
I will lead some of them, yes, but there are service coordination and improvement managers in each department that will also potentially lead some of them as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, there are no further questions. Could I get someone to move the 2019 internal audit plan? Moved by Councillor Johnson. I don't see any comments. Those in favor? And that carries unanimously as well. Okay, please continue.
All right, so the next topic is the fourth quarter audit status report. And today I'll be taking you through the results of the physical inventory count and the hiring transparency and nepotism follow-up audit. As I mentioned, I'm also currently working on the utilities review and the development services review. So we'll start with physical inventory. Now, the city's stores staff operate a warehouse within the Kitchener Operations Facility, which contains commonly used parts, materials, and tools that other city staff need to perform their work. Some of the inventory is stored outside in the yard, such as large pipe, catch basins, aggregates, salt, etc. Stores staff perform an annual inventory of all parts and material in order to ensure that the financial records match the amount on hand. Once their count and adjustments have been made, I, along with a volunteer from accounting, then do a count to sample parts to provide assurance that the staff counts are accurate. This is a standard audit activity for any organization that has physical inventory. My count verification consists of two types of counts. The first is sheet-to-floor counts, where I pre-select a sample of parts based on their value. Find them, count them, and then compare to the total listed in our financial system called SAP. The parts that I pre-select are the top 20 total values and the top 20 individual unit values. We then also do a floor-to-sheet count, where we randomly find parts in the warehouse, count them, and then look them up in SAP to compare to the quantity that we counted. From year to year, the total number of parts counted in the sample may vary, but what I do try to do is ensure that we have selected enough parts to cover at least 20% of the total value of inventory. This year, the sample totaled slightly more than that at 23%. Our count verification uncovered 3 parts where the quantity that we counted did not match what was in SAP. This represents 5% of the 60 parts we counted and resulted in a further write-down of about $4,500 in our financial records. This was the lowest number of variances that we found over the years and the lowest value of adjustments. Typically, we find 10 to 12 variances with a value of around $10,000. So this is good news, and it provides us with more assurance that the rest of the counts are also accurate. In addition to the annual physical inventory, store staff routinely do rotating stock counts and make adjustments when required. Another part of the analysis that I do is to look at all of the adjustments that staff have made throughout the year. A large amount of write-offs could indicate that the controls are weak, that there may be theft or damage. If there are large anomalies, I will investigate further to determine the root cause. Overall this year, up until October 30th when I ran the report, the stores team processed $112,000 of write-downs. Or in other words, the financial records needed to be reduced to match the quantity that was physically on hand. This represents 1.5% of the total inventory purchases for the period and is lower than the industry benchmark of 2.5%. It's also about half of what has been recorded in previous years. Now, this can be divided into two types of inventory for analysis purposes. The first is controllable stock, and this includes all of the parts that are stored in the warehouse that stores staff have exclusive control over. This year, there were total adjustments of just over $1,000 write-up. This means the quantity on hand was more than what was recorded in SAP. And this can happen if the wrong unit of measure is input when the stock is received, or there's a typo on the quantity. This is a very small amount and what I would expect given that staff have absolute control over this stock. The second type is uncontrollable stock, which is anything that is stored outside in the yard. So this includes things like pipe, materials such as salt or asphalt, catch basins, and other large items. So just to be clear, this stock is located in the locked fence perimeter and not accessible by the public. However, city staff have full access to take the stock when they need it for their jobs. Often they do not tell store staff that they have taken it, which means that it does not get relieved from SAP, hence the large write-downs during the physical inventory. But as you can see, when we break this down by material group, these amounts are a lot less than last year and previous years. When I asked why this might be, I was told that stores has implemented more frequent monitoring of the outside stock and end up going back to staff to request work orders when they notice that stock has been taken. This means that the write-downs at year-end are minimized and stock is being properly charged to work activities. Another variable this year is that as a result of the aggregates review that we did last year, the city is now generating our own recycled aggregates, which have a lower unit cost than new virgin material. So this means that the total value of any write-downs for asphalt is now less. In the near future, a mobile timesheet app will be rolled out to staff, which will be pre-populated with material descriptions, which will make it easier for staff to relieve inventory at the source rather than having to tell store staff to do it. So in conclusion, I feel that the inventory continues to be in control and that the adjustments that have been made are negligible. I would also like to recognize store staff for the significant improvements that have been made over the last year. Are there any questions about this audit before I move on to the next topic?
Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, somewhere I read your inventory is 2.3 million, is that right?
Correct.
Is that a consolidated inventory of everything that's consolidated on our financial statements, or?
No, it's just inventory for the corporation of the City of Kitchener, so it doesn't include any inventory at Centre in the Square or the library or anything like that.
No, but it does include everything, all our utilities and everything that comes under the city, everything at the auditorium, in all our community centers, wherever.
Includes everything that's in the warehouse at the COF and in the yard.
Yeah. Okay. And that's good. Your figures are amazing. Amazingly low for a corporation this size. I sometimes wonder, are we spending too much time covering it too closely? I know that's not the thing you normally want to hear, but sometimes, sometimes when I can remember someone that would work and would double check something 5 times to make sure they didn't make a little mistake. But is that the best use of our resources? It's something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay,
I would agree that double checking work is considered to be waste. What we aim to do is to mistake-proof the processes in the first place so that we don't have errors and we don't need to check them. So yes, we're getting to that point. I think we're way better now than we were 15 years ago when I started.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston?
Thank you. I also had a question around process. So when you say that you're checking the physical inventory, if I'm correct in hearing how you talked about it, you're actually physically counting it?
Correct.
Okay. I was wondering if we have ever looked at different tech options that are available for that, like a GIS for inventory as it comes in, and then it's easy to account for when it goes in and out. Just wondering.
So all of the inventory is scanned as it goes in and as it goes out, and that's how it gets into SAP. However, there's always, at this point, there's the option or the possibility of human error if the quantity's input wrong or scanned incorrectly or put somewhere else. If there's damage, if there's loss, if there's hopefully not theft, but if there is theft. So that's why we do this check, to make sure that what we have on hand is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I just have one question. On the slide of uncontrollable stock, the steel, aluminum, and plate figure seems to be rather large. What happened there?
Sorry, which page?
That's the uncontrollable stock. It's 3 slides back, I think.
Yeah. So, sorry, I didn't hear the question.
No, the question is, could you provide further detail on the steel, aluminum, and plate? On the 2017 figure was, they're in parentheses, 20,000, and the 2018 figure is 195.
It's $195.
Oh, pardon me, $195. Oh, okay, my mistake. Okay. Forget that. Yeah, there are no further questions. Please continue.
All right. So last topic of the day, and that is the follow-up audit and status update of the hiring transparency and nepotism audit that I did originally in 2011. So there are 3 main objectives to this review, and the first objective is to provide a status update to ensure that the audit recommendations are being implemented in a timely manner and to document any benefits that have been realized through the implementation. In this case, a significant amount of time has gone by since my original audit. I had postponed this status update several years in a row to give HR staff time to implement the main recommendation, which was around staff training. Other corporate priorities delayed the implementation for a few years. The training was finally rolled out in 2017, so I was able to proceed with the status update in 2018. And I gave them the extra time because I wanted to do a follow-up audit as well and testing of the hiring transparency and fairness to see if the training had had the desired effect. So I needed to allow enough time for management staff to take the training and then to start applying what they had learned. And the third objective was to reassess the compliance with the hiring of relatives policy. As you will see in your package, I've divided my report into 3 sections to address each of these objectives. So regarding the first objective, 6 of the original recommendations have been fully implemented and included streamlining the hiring process, developing and delivering comprehensive training for management, and creating online resources such as standard operating procedures with step-by-step instructions. The 4 recommendations that are in progress are related to making changes to the hiring of relatives policy, which I'll talk about later. And these have been investigated and benchmarked, but are waiting for a more comprehensive review of all HR policies. The 1 recommendation that is not started is minor in nature and relates to requiring the third-party hiring agencies to comply with our records retention schedules. This will be addressed the next time this service is put out for tender. And finally, 1 of the recommendations is no longer required, and this related to developing an online solution to store all job competition files. Our records management staff advised that given the short retention period for these records, that it wasn't worth the effort to do this. The second objective was to retest the hiring transparency of job competitions. I did this by pulling a random sample from all of the hires that occurred in the last year. The sample size was 49 job competitions, or 6% of all of the hires. I reviewed the job competition file for each one and evaluated them against a number of criteria, including whether it was evident that 2 or more people interviewed the candidates in order to mitigate personal bias, whether there were interview notes for each candidate, whether there was a method to rate the answers to each question and rank the candidates, and finally, whether there was each successful candidate had a fully executed letter in their personnel file. The intent was to verify if the process had been fair and transparent and whether the proper documentation was kept. Without this, it would be difficult to have a legally defensible position regarding the hiring decision. What I found through this testing was a mix of positive improvements and areas that still require attention. So I personally took the training and found it to be very comprehensive, and it covers all of the major points that I had originally recommended. I also found that the online resources are very thorough and will provide a valuable resource to hiring managers. What was disappointing was that only 69% of management staff have taken the training so far. When I brought this to senior management's attention, there was a decision made that only management staff that are part of the hiring process should be required to take the training, as there are a handful of management staff with no direct reports and no need to be aware of this process at this time. So there is still some work to do to sort through that list of those who haven't taken the training and determine who needs to still take it. A positive finding is that 100% of the successful candidates now have fully executed offer letters this time, compared to only 46% when I did the audit in 2011. The HR-led competitions were found to be fair and transparent, and for the most part had all of the required documentation in the job competition file. This is similar to the findings from the original audit. Where there is more room for improvement is with the department-led competitions. These are typically part-time or temporary seasonal positions which are hired regularly by the hiring departments. Therefore, they are familiar with the process, albeit sometimes the wrong process, and they don't reach out for HR assistance. I found that many of these lack complete documentation to support the hiring decision, such as ranking criteria or interview notes. Some also only had documentation for the successful candidate in the personnel file, and a job competition file did not exist at all. While most of the jobs were posted in our candidate applicant system called HireDesk and on our website, there were a few in this sample which were not posted at all, with the hiring manager drawing from unsolicited resumes that had been submitted. So definitely more work is required to clarify these hiring processes for the part-time and temporary positions and to ensure that they are following similar principles to the full-time hires. One thing I did note in the online resources was that it wasn't clear that they had to follow the same process or where there might be latitude to customize the approach to the work area. The recommendations that I had for this part of the review included having senior management ensure that all management and staff that are involved in hiring have taken the hiring at Kitchener training. Having HR clarify the process for part-time and temporary hires with guidelines for how to apply them. Providing more emphasis in the training course and online materials around the importance of retaining documentation in the job competition file, and then periodically reminding all hiring managers of the hiring process requirements. The third and final piece of this review was to reassess compliance with the city's hiring of relatives policy. The wording of the policy states that relatives of the CAO, GMs, directors, and HR staff cannot work at the city, and relatives of managers and supervisors cannot work in the same department unless they are a student, in which case they just can't be in the same division. The intent of the policy is to ensure that employees are not put in a position of authority over their relatives, to ensure that they are not involved in hiring, promotion, salary, or discipline or termination. However, as you can see, the wording of the policy is more prescriptive in terms of specific roles or departments and can create artificial conflicts where employees work in the same department but do not actually have any authority over one another. In my original audit, I had recommended changing the wording. However, this is still in progress, as I mentioned. So for the time being, my testing used the existing wording and conditions. So I first ran a report from PeopleSoft to find all the related employees by either matching records based on home address or based on last name. These tests do not, however, capture any relatives that live at different addresses with different last names. I then determined if the related employees were in conflict with the policy based on which department they worked in and which position they held. So this resulted in 205 matches of employees with the same address, which translates into about 100 relationships. This is down from 411 employees and 180 relationships from 2011. Within those matches, there were only 5 conflicts with the policy as it is currently worded, which is down from 7 conflicts in 2011. 3 of these were previously documented and 2 were new. Of the new ones, 1 was a direct result of the corporate reorganization that happened earlier this year, placing 2 employees in the same department where they had previously been in separate departments. The last name match did not generate any further matches for testing. So my conclusions for this part of the review are that although there are many staff who are related to each other, there are very few conflicts with the policy, and none of those were situations where the employee was reporting directly to their relative. And it is positive to see that the job postings now contain a statement about the policy and ask applicants to declare any relationships with current employees as part of the hiring process. And this will help avoid conflicts in the future. So that concludes this audit topic. Are there any questions?
There are. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you for this. Just a question about the hiring process. Is this not detailed in the collective agreement?
Sorry, pardon me?
Is it not detailed in the collective agreement? The hiring processes?
I can't answer that. Anyone?
Ms. Rabb?
I'm here. You can't see me, right?
Oh. Try again. There you go.
I'm not sure the answer to that, but I'll check in with staff and get back to you.
Yeah, I just wondered the overlap, if there was any.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Ms. Rabb will get back to you.
Mr. Chapman?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll follow. What I can say is that the detailed steps are not outlined. Certainly there are provisions around seniority and what position employees would have in preferential treatment in a process based on their seniority, but the detailed administrative steps would not be covered in the collective agreement.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I was concerned in where you indicated that some competitions were not posted, and I'm surprised that with the that you weren't contested on that by the labor unions. Is that what have we done to correct? Shouldn't all competitions be posted?
Yes, they should all be posted, and a list of any ones that I did find, any of the things that were wrong, not just not being posted, has been provided to senior management so that they can follow up with those hiring managers and make them aware of what the procedures should be.
If something has not been posted, can it be redone? Or
at this point, it's probably not, given that these were over a year ago. So. And a lot of these were temporary positions anyways. So they've already probably been and gone.
Okay, that was the other thing. I wondered if they were all in one area or if they're scattered across the whole organization. So
they were across the entire organization. I would say by number of employees, we certainly have more temporary and part-time positions in some of the larger departments and divisions, such as operations and community services, where we've got a lot of seasonal staff.
My other question deals with the conflicts. We still have 5 conflicts with the employment of relatives. What kind of conflicts are those? That they are in the same department as their relatives, or?
Right, so as the policy is written, so if they are a management employee and they have a relative working within the same department, that would be a conflict. There were another one that was, an HR employee with a relative working here as well. So,
can we not correct those situations? Or?
So what we have done is we've made both parties and their management aware of the conflict with the policy, and gotten a letter signed by all parties to acknowledge the conflict and make sure that they're mitigating it. So making sure that they're not put in a position of authority over each other. So as I said, the way that the policy is worded really isn't the same as the intent of the policy. The intent is that you're not managing the work of your relative, which none of these are.
No, and I appreciate that. Shouldn't we be watching these, though, where an opportunity comes up that we can clear those up? If do opportunities arise sometime that you can move something around so you no longer have that conflict? I would hope that we're sort of always watching for that opportunity to clear up the conflict.
That is out of my purview, but...
Yeah, Councillor Gazal, that wouldn't be a question of audit. I think we should assume that staff is aware of it, and they would, should the opportunity present itself, work towards that goal.
Okay, thank you. I have a housekeeping question.
Go ahead.
No, in starting a new term, I'm trying to not save as much paper as I have in the past. So I just wanted to ask you a question. Your report, Flick, on this, your report goes to 4.8, okay, right? And then you've got this slideshow. I'm just curious. When these things are filed away online in our archive, is the whole display also included with it? So I don't have to save anything. It's all there. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. My question is around whether or not you took a look at the actual job postings, the content of the job postings when you were looking at hiring transparencies, because I find that there's a real connection between how the posting is written and then the how the interviewing goes and the quality of the candidate that you're looking for. So I don't know if that's part of what the audit committee would look at, or that might be something totally separate, and I apologize if it is.
It's not something that I looked at this time, but given it's on my work plan for next year, it is something that I could certainly look at. So you're looking for how the job posting itself was written, and what specifically would you like me to look for?
Well, I think that if you're looking for transparency around who you hire, I think how the job posting is written really kind of feeds into who you will end up with. If you put the right things into your postings, it's going to really help you have a transparent hiring procedure and then end up with the people that you're looking for.
Okay, there are no further questions, and there's no motion required for this last portion. Just thank you, Ms. Tasker. Excellent work, and we'll see you sometime soon.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so meeting's adjourned. We do meet in caucus in about 15 minutes. Okay.